we're going to be looking at some of the critiques leveled at Shankaracharya and his Advaita Vedanta philosophy.
Okay.
So, for those of you who might not be familiar with Shankaracharya,
Right.
he was an incredibly influential Indian philosopher
Mm-hmm.
who lived back in the 8th century CE.
Yeah.
And his ideas have had a profound impact on Hindu thought.
Yeah. I mean, Shankaracharya is really considered like a rock star
Yeah.
in the world of Hindu philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, he really is credited with reviving and systematizing Advaita Vedanta.
Wow. Yeah.
And just to kind of give a quick overview for our listeners,
Yeah.
Advaita Vedanta is a school of thought within Hinduism
Mm-hmm.
that argues for this kind of radical non-dualism.
Right. Right.
And just to kind of put it in very simple terms,
Yeah.
the basic idea is that the ultimate reality is a single unified force
Mm-hmm.
that they call Brahman, and that everything else that we perceive
Right.
as separate and individual is ultimately an illusion,
Yes.
and they call that Maya.
Maya.
So
A big claim.
it's a bold claim.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
saying, the world we see
Right.
and feel and experience isn't really what it seems.
Yeah.
So did everyone just kind of accept that?
Well, no, not quite.
Right.
It was a pretty revolutionary idea for the time, and
Yeah.
Shankaracharya really faced pushback from various schools of thought,
Okay.
both within Hinduism and from other traditions as well.
Okay, so it's kind of like a philosophical battle royale.
Yeah, you could say that.
All these different schools of thought kind of duking it out.
Yeah, and I think what's so fascinating about looking at these critiques is that they really reveal a lot about
Right.
the different ways that people were trying to understand existence and the self
Yeah.
and the path to liberation.
Yeah, so it's like a window into these ancient philosophical debates.
Absolutely.
So who were some of Shankaracharya's main opponents?
Yeah.
And what were their issues with Advaita Vedanta?
So I think one of the most interesting places to start is with the Mimamsa school.
Okay.
And the Mimamsa school was very much focused on the power of rituals.
Okay.
They believed that meticulously performing rituals,
Okay.
as laid out in the Vedas,
Mm-hmm.
was the key to achieving liberation.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, rituals are such a big part
Right.
of a lot of religious traditions.
Right. Absolutely.
So how did Shankaracharya kind of address that view?
Well, Shankaracharya, while he respected their dedication to the Vedas,
Right.
he argued that rituals could only bring about temporary results.
Okay.
For him, true liberation came
Mhm.
from knowledge of Brahman,
Okay.
right? This ultimate reality that we were talking about.
Right. Okay.
And he saw the Upanishads, which are these philosophical texts within the Vedas
Mm-hmm.
that focus on the nature of reality
Yeah.
as being the most important teaching. While the Mimamsa school prioritized the ritualistic portions.
Right. So it's almost like he's saying actions are important, but
Right.
understanding the true nature of reality is
Yeah.
what ultimately sets you free.
Exactly.
Okay. So what other schools of thought did Shankaracharya kind of butt heads with?
Well, his emphasis on Maya,
Mm-hmm.
right, the idea that the world is an illusion,
Yeah.
caused some major controversy.
Okay.
He was even accused of being a crypto-Buddhist
Oh, wow.
by rival Hindu schools
Right.
like Vishishtadvaita Vedanta and Bhagavad Vedanta.
Okay.
These schools believed in a more personal God,
Mm-hmm.
and they emphasized devotion as a key part of the spiritual path.
Right. Right.
And they felt that Shankaracharya was undermining those ideas.
So we've got the ritualists versus the knowledge seekers.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're throwing in that is there a personal God debate?
Exactly.
Okay, so did Shankaracharya also engage with those super logical schools of thought,
Yeah.
like Nyaya and Vaisheshika?
Oh, absolutely. Nyaya and Vaisheshika were all about logic and categories.
Right.
And analyzing the world through those lenses, they
Oh.
had a very pluralistic worldview,
Right.
believing in multiple independent realities,
Okay.
like eternal atoms and individual souls.
Okay.
So they were coming at it from a completely different angle than Shankaracharya.
So how did Shankaracharya, with this idea of a unified Brahman,
Right.
respond to these schools that were all about
Yeah.
breaking reality down into all these different parts?
He argued that the multiplicity they were seeing was just a product of ignorance,
Yeah.
a failure to see the underlying unity of Brahman.
Yeah.
One way to think about it is they were focused on the trees
Okay.
while he was pointing to the entire forest.
Okay, I can see how that would have sparked some serious debate.
Oh, yeah,
This idea of a unified reality versus a reality made up of many parts.
absolutely.
But didn't Shankaracharya's ideas
Mm-hmm.
also resonate with some schools of thought outside of Hinduism,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Sufism.
And early Christian mysticism.
Right.
I mean, they also talk about unity and transcendence.
Right. That's a great observation. And there are definite parallels in terms of the emphasis on unity and transcendence.
Yeah.
But the nuances
Okay.
of how they understood the divine and the role of love and the fate of individual consciousness after death
Yeah, right.
differed significantly.
Yeah.
So Shankaracharya, with his focus on non-dualism, might have critiqued the dualistic aspects
Okay.
of those traditions,
I
like
see.
the idea of a personal God,
Okay.
the emphasis on emotions, and the persistence of individual identity, even in mystical union.
Right.
He might have seen those aspects as part of Maya,
Okay.
not the ultimate reality.
Okay. So it's like different levels of reality.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So it's amazing how all these different philosophical perspectives offer such different windows into understanding reality.
Yeah.
But what about Buddhism?
How did those discussions play out, considering their focus on this idea of no self?
That's where things get really complex.
Okay.
Buddhist scholars have often argued that Shankaracharya fundamentally misunderstood Buddhism,
Okay.
particularly their concept of no self.
Okay.
They firmly reject the notion of a permanent independent self,
Right.
whereas Shankaracharya saw the Atman, the true self, as identical with Brahman.
Right. So it sounds like a clash of core beliefs about
Yeah.
the nature of reality,
Yeah.
the self.
Absolutely.
Did these critiques of Shankaracharya's ideas just come from outside of Advaita Vedanta? Or did he also face pushback from within his own school of thought?
That's a great question, and it highlights the dynamic nature of philosophical inquiry.
Yeah.
Even within Advaita Vedanta, there were and still are different interpretations and approaches.
Okay.
So some thinkers, while agreeing with the core principles of non-dualism, might have debated specific aspects of Shankaracharya's interpretation.
Okay.
Or emphasize different practices for realizing
Right.
that non-dual reality.
Okay, so even within Advaita Vedanta, there's this room for debate
Right.
and nuance.
Absolutely.
It's not like everyone just blindly accepted Shankaracharya's word.
No, it's gospel.
I think that's one of the things that makes studying philosophy so exciting.
Right.
It's not about memorizing a set of doctrines.
Yeah.
It's about grappling with these big questions, exploring different perspectives,
Right.
and ultimately forming your own understanding.
Yeah. It sounds like Shankaracharya himself
Yeah,
would have appreciated that approach, considering
I think so.
how he engaged with so many different schools of thought.
Right, and I think the fact that we're still discussing his ideas
Yeah.
and the critiques against them centuries later
Right.
is a testament to the enduring power of his thought and the importance of these philosophical questions. Yeah, so we've seen how Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta really kind of shook things up in the world of Indian philosophy.
Right.
It challenged the focus on rituals. It sparked debates about the nature of God
Yeah.
and the self.
Right.
And it even had some surprising points of connection with traditions outside of Hinduism.
Right. But I think what's important to remember is that Shankaracharya wasn't just trying to win arguments.
Right.
He was pushing people to confront the
Yeah.
fundamental questions of existence. And his critiques and the critiques against him invite us to do the same,
Right.
to question our own assumptions and to explore these different ways of seeing the world.
Yeah. It's like he's saying, don't just take my word for it.
Exactly.
Think for yourself.
Yeah.
Explore these ideas and see where they lead you.
Right. And that's what we're going to continue to do.
Okay.
In this deep dive, we're going to delve deeper into some specific critiques and see how they can help us understand not only Shankaracharya's ideas, but also the broader landscape of philosophical thought.
Okay. Sounds like we've got a lot more to unpack. So stay tuned, listeners.
Yeah.
As we continue this deep dive into the fascinating world
Right.
of Shankaracharya and his critics.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the critiques of Shankaracharya. So in the last part, we saw how he really kind of challenged some major schools of thought within Hinduism. But his ideas also sparked some interesting comparisons with traditions outside of Hinduism,
Right.
like Sufism and early Christian mysticism. And I find it really fascinating how
Yeah.
these seemingly different traditions from different parts of the world
Right.
are all grappling with similar questions about the nature of reality and the divine.
It's true. I mean, it speaks to the universality of these questions, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So let's dive into that a little bit. What are some of the key similarities and differences
Yeah.
between Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta and these mystical traditions?
Well, I think one of the most striking similarities is this emphasis on unity
Okay.
and transcendence.
Mm-hmm.
Both Advaita Vedanta and these mystical traditions point towards an underlying reality that goes beyond
Wow.
the dualities and limitations of the everyday world.
Okay.
They talk about experiencing a state of oneness, emerging with something greater than the individual self.
So even though they come from different cultures and different religions, they're all trying to understand this idea
Right.
of merging into something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. And they also all emphasize the importance of direct experience
Okay.
over intellectual understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just about reading scriptures or debating ideas.
Right.
It's about having a direct, transformative experience of that ultimate reality.
So even with these similarities, there must be some pretty big differences too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, one key difference, I think, lies in their understanding of the nature of that ultimate reality.
Okay.
For Shankaracharya, Brahman is ultimately impersonal.
Okay.
And unchanging.
Mhm.
It's pure consciousness without any attributes or qualities.
Okay, so no personality, no emotions, no will.
Exactly.
Just pure existence.
Pure existence, yeah.
Okay, but in Sufism and Christian mysticism,
Right.
that ultimate reality is often understood as a personal God,
Right.
a being with whom you can have a relationship,
Yeah.
a connection based on love and devotion.
Right.
So that's a pretty significant
Big difference.
Yeah, difference in emphasis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so one is impersonal, the other is personal.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What other differences stand out?
Another key difference is their view of the material world.
Okay.
Advaita Vedanta sees the world as Maya,
Right.
an illusion that we need to transcend to achieve liberation.
Okay.
But in Sufism and Christian mysticism, the world is often seen as a manifestation of the divine,
Okay.
a reflection of God's beauty and creativity.
Interesting.
It's not something to be rejected or escaped from, but something to be appreciated and experienced as part of the spiritual journey.
So for Advaita Vedanta, you're trying to see past
Yeah.
the illusion of the world.
Right.
And for these other mystical traditions, you're trying to see the divine within the world.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And these differences in perspective
Yeah.
naturally lead to different approaches to spiritual practice.
Okay.
Advaita Vedanta emphasizes techniques like meditation and self-inquiry
Right.
to help you realize the true nature of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Sufism and Christian mysticism often incorporate practices like chanting, prayer, and devotional rituals
Okay.
to cultivate a loving relationship with God.
So different paths up the same mountain,
Yeah, you could say that.
to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, so all this talk about mystical experiences and merging with the divine, it sounds pretty abstract.
Yeah.
How would these different perspectives actually play out in someone's life? What would it look like
Okay.
to live from an Advaita Vedanta perspective versus, say, a Sufi perspective?
That's a great question. I mean, someone living from an Advaita Vedanta perspective might focus on detaching from worldly desires and attachments. They might prioritize practices like meditation and self-inquiry
Right.
to help them realize their oneness with Brahman.
Okay.
Their actions might be guided by a sense of inner peace and equanimity, knowing that ultimately everything is part of that unified reality.
Okay, so a sense of detachment
Right.
and inner peace would guide their actions.
Mm-hmm.
What about someone living from a Sufi perspective?
For a Sufi, their life might be infused with a sense of love and devotion towards God. They might engage in practices like chanting and devotional poetry to cultivate that connection.
Okay.
Their actions might be motivated by a desire to serve God and to see the divine reflected in all of creation.
So their actions would stem from a deep love and devotion.
Yeah. Okay.
It's fascinating to see how these abstract philosophical ideas
Yeah.
can translate into very different ways of being in the world.
It is, and it highlights, I think, the power of philosophy.
Right.
To not just explain the world, but to actually shape how we experience it and interact with it.
Okay. let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And explore another critique of Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta. This time from the Jain tradition.
Okay.
And Jainism is particularly interesting because, like Advaita Vedanta, it's an ancient Indian tradition with a strong philosophical foundation, but it offers a very different perspective on the nature of reality and the path to liberation.
It does.
So just to kind of remind our listeners, Jainism is known for its emphasis on nonviolence.
Yeah.
And this idea that there are countless individual souls. Right?
Exactly. Jains believe in the existence of multiple eternal souls called jivas. And these souls are trapped in a cycle of birth and death due to karma, which is the consequence of actions.
Right.
And liberation for them comes from purifying the soul through strict ethical conduct, nonviolence, and detachment from the material world.
So it sounds like there's a strong emphasis on individual responsibility and the consequences of your actions in Jainism.
Right.
So how does that contrast with Shankaracharya's idea of a single unified Brahman?
That's a core difference between the two traditions. Right. For Advaita Vedanta, there's ultimately only one self, that Brahman that we've been talking about.
Right.
The sense of individual selves is part of Maya, the illusion.
Right.
But for Jainism, those individual souls are very real.
And the goal is to liberate each one of those souls from the cycle of suffering.
So you've got one ultimate self versus countless individual souls. It's like two completely different starting points.
It is.
For understanding reality.
But even with these differences, there are some interesting points of convergence. Both traditions see liberation as the ultimate goal.
Right.
And they both emphasize the importance of transcending the limitations of the material world. They both reject excessive ritualism, and they focus on internal purification and self-knowledge as essential for spiritual progress.
So while their ontologies are different, their soteriologies,
Yeah.
their ideas about how to achieve liberation
Right.
seem to have some common ground.
Yeah, they do. But even when it comes to liberation,
Okay.
there are important nuances.
Okay.
Right? Jainism emphasizes rigorous ethical discipline and asceticism.
As the means to purify the soul and break free from the cycle of karma.
Okay.
Advaita Vedanta, however, focuses on the realization of the self's identity with Brahman through knowledge and meditation.
So one is about purifying the soul through action, and the other is about realizing your true nature through knowledge.
Yeah. That's a great way to summarize it.
Okay.
And these different approaches, I think, stem from their contrasting views on karma.
Okay.
Jains see karma as a physical substance that clings to the soul, influencing its future births.
Okay.
Advaita Vedanta sees karma as more of a result of ignorance,
Okay.
a failure to recognize the true nature of the self.
So it's like one sees karma as a material burden,
Yeah.
and the other sees it as more of a mental or spiritual one.
That's a helpful way to think about it.
Yeah, it's amazing how these different traditions, with their unique perspectives, can offer such contrasting interpretations of even seemingly similar concepts.
It really is. It highlights the richness, I think,
Right.
and diversity of philosophical thought.
Yeah, and speaking of diversity, I'm curious to know how Shankaracharya engaged with other prominent Indian philosophical schools,
Okay.
like Sankhya and Yoga.
Yeah, that's a great segue. Sankhya and Yoga are fascinating because they share some common ground with Advaita Vedanta, while also presenting some fundamental differences. Both Sankhya and Yoga accept the concept of liberation as the ultimate goal, and they acknowledge the limitations of the material world, but they differ from Advaita Vedanta in their understanding of the nature of reality and the self.
Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. Let's start with Sankhya.
Okay.
I know they're known for their dualistic worldview. What does that mean exactly?
So, Sankhya philosophy proposes two fundamental realities. Purusha, which is pure consciousness, and Prakriti, which is primordial matter. They believe that the material world, with all its complexities, evolves out of Prakriti. But Purusha, pure consciousness, remains separate and unaffected by this process.
So it's like they're saying there's a clear distinction between consciousness and matter.
Exactly.
Okay, and liberation, according to Sankhya, comes from realizing this distinction between Purusha and Prakriti.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's about understanding that your true nature is pure consciousness.
Yeah.
Not the material body or mind that you identify with.
Right.
Okay, I can see how this aligns with Advaita Vedanta's emphasis on transcending the limitations of the material world. But I'm guessing Shankaracharya wasn't totally on board with the whole two separate realities idea.
You're right. While Shankaracharya acknowledged Sankhya's insights into the nature of the mind and the importance of discrimination, he ultimately rejected their dualism.
Okay. So he wouldn't agree with this idea of two separate and eternal realities.
Right.
Purusha and Prakriti.
Exactly. For Shankaracharya, Brahman is the sole reality.
Right.
The only thing that truly exists.
Okay.
Everything else, including this distinction between consciousness and matter, is ultimately a manifestation of Maya, the illusion.
Okay.
He argued that Sankhya's dualism created an unnecessary separation and prevented the realization of true unity.
Okay, so even though both traditions value liberation from the material world, their understanding of what that liberation entails and how to achieve it differs significantly.
Yeah, that's a key point.
Okay.
Now, moving on to yoga.
Okay.
This tradition is closely intertwined with Sankhya, sharing its dualistic metaphysics.
Okay.
However, yoga emphasizes practical techniques for achieving liberation.
Right. Okay.
Specifically, the eightfold path outlined in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras.
Right. So yoga is known for its emphasis on practice, meditation, ethical discipline, breath control, and so on.
Exactly. And Shankaracharya acknowledged the value of these practices, seeing them as preparatory steps for realizing the non-dual Brahman. He believed that the ethical guidelines and the mental discipline cultivated through yoga are helpful in purifying the mind, making it more receptive to deeper spiritual insights.
So in a way, he saw yoga as a valuable stepping stone towards Advaita Vedanta.
You could say that, however, Shankaracharya was clear that the ultimate goal of yoga, which involves isolating Purusha from Prakriti, wasn't the same as realizing the non-dual Brahman.
Okay, so once again, while both traditions value transcendence, their understanding of what that transcendence means and how to achieve it differs. Okay.
Right, for yoga, liberation is about separating consciousness from matter, achieving a state of pure awareness. Distinct from the material world. But for Advaita Vedanta, liberation isn't about separation. It's about realizing the non-dual unity of all existence in Brahman. There's no need to separate anything because ultimately there's no real separation to begin with. It's all just Brahman.
It's fascinating how Shankaracharya navigated these complex philosophical debates. He engaged with different schools of thought. He acknowledged their insights, but always brought the conversation back to his own vision of non-dual reality. He was definitely a master at weaving together.
Yeah, he was.
Different ideas and perspectives.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that makes studying philosophy so rewarding. You get to dive into these intricate debates, explore different viewpoints, and ultimately come to your own understanding of these fundamental questions.
It's like a giant puzzle.
Where
you're trying to fit all these different pieces together to get a clear picture of reality.
I love that analogy. That's great. And just when you think you've got a handle on things, a new critique emerges, challenging your assumptions and forcing you to re-examine the pieces. And speaking of critiques, I think it's time we venture beyond the borders of India and explore how Shankaracharya's ideas might have interacted with a completely different tradition, early Christian mysticism.
Now that's a comparison I didn't see coming. On the surface, they seem like completely different worlds. So what possible connections could there be between Advaita Vedanta and Christian mysticism?
You might be surprised to hear this. But there are actually some intriguing parallels between the two. Both traditions place a strong emphasis on the ultimate unity of reality and the importance of transcending the ego, that sense of a separate self. Christian mystics often talk about experiencing a mystical union with God,
Mm-hmm.
a dissolving of the individual self into the divine.
So in both traditions, there's this idea of moving beyond the limitations of the individual ego
Yeah,
and experiencing a state of unity.
exactly.
Okay, and both traditions also emphasize the importance of direct experience over intellectual understanding.
Yeah.
Christian mystics believe that contemplative prayer and inner silence
Right.
are paths to experiencing God directly.
Yeah.
Much like Advaita Vedanta emphasizes the direct realization of Brahman.
Right.
But I imagine there are some pretty significant differences too, right?
Oh, of course.
After all, we are talking about two very different religious traditions.
Absolutely. One of the most obvious differences lies in their understanding of the nature of that ultimate reality.
Right.
Shankaracharya's Brahman, as we've discussed, is impersonal.
Right.
And without attributes, it's pure consciousness. Christian mystics, on the other hand, generally see God as a personal, loving being.
Okay, so one is impersonal, the other is personal. That's a pretty fundamental difference.
Absolutely. And this leads to another key divergence.
Okay.
The role of love and devotion.
Okay.
In Advaita Vedanta, while devotion is acknowledged, it's ultimately seen as subordinate to knowledge.
Okay.
Liberation comes from realizing the true nature of the self, not from a loving relationship with a personal God.
So for Advaita Vedanta, knowledge trumps love, so to speak.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
But in Christian mysticism, love and devotion are at the heart of the mystical experience. They're not just steps on the path, they're essential aspects of the union with God.
Okay, so for Christian mystics, the path and the goal are intertwined with love. Okay, that's a beautiful way to think about it.
Yeah.
Are there any other key differences that stand out?
One more important difference, I think, is the question of individuality.
Okay.
In Advaita Vedanta, the individual self ultimately dissolves completely into Brahman. There's no sense of individual identity left.
Okay.
But in Christian mysticism, there's generally a sense of individual identity, even in union with God.
So a complete merging in Advaita Vedanta versus a unity with distinction in Christian mysticism.
Exactly. It's like two different ways of imagining that ultimate union.
Okay.
And I think these differences highlight how even within the realm of mysticism, where there are shared goals of transcendence, different traditions can have very different understandings of what that transcendence means and how it's experienced.
This is getting pretty mind-bending.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see how Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta, which originated in India centuries ago, can spark these kinds of comparisons with traditions from all over the world.
Yeah, it's a testament to the universality of these core philosophical questions and the diverse ways that different cultures have tried to answer them. And it's a reminder that even when traditions seem vastly different on the surface, there can be surprising points of connection and resonance when we delve deeper.
Right, okay. So we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
We've explored how Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta interacts with mystical traditions, like Sufism and Christian mysticism. And we've delved into those fascinating contrasts between Advaita Vedanta and Jainism.
It's been a rich exploration of the nuances and complexities of these different philosophical perspectives.
Yeah, and we're not done yet.
No, we're not.
There's one more crucial critique we need to address. And that's the complex and often contentious relationship between Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism. And I think that's a conversation that deserves its own dedicated space.
Indeed it does.
So
get ready for a deep dive into the heart of this philosophical showdown. We'll be back soon to explore the fascinating similarities and stark differences between these two influential traditions.
Okay, stay tuned, listeners.
Yeah.
The debate continues. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into the critiques of Shankaracharya. And we've been on quite a journey.
We have.
Exploring how his Advaita Vedanta philosophy kind of sparked all these debates and comparisons with all these different schools of thought.
From ritualistic Mimamsa to mystical Sufism.
Exactly. And now we arrive at what I think is maybe the most intriguing showdown of them all.
I think so, too.
The clash between Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism.
Right.
It's fascinating to me how these two traditions, both originating in ancient India,
Right.
they share some really striking similarities,
Yeah.
kind of on the surface. But then when you dig a little deeper,
Yeah.
you find some pretty fundamental disagreements.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a relationship marked by both profound resonance and sharp divergence.
Yeah.
As we've been talking about, both Advaita Vedanta
Right.
and Buddhism emphasize the illusory nature of the material world and the importance of transcending the ego.
Right. They both recognize that clinging
Yeah.
to this limited sense of self
Right.
is the root of suffering.
It is.
Right? It's like they're both pointing us towards a reality
Bruh.
that's beyond our everyday perceptions and urging us to let go of these attachments
Right.
to the temporary and the fleeting.
Fleeting, yeah.
But then that's where the disagreements start, right?
That's where the fireworks really start.
Yeah.
When we start talking about
Right.
the nature of ultimate reality and,
Right.
and what liberation actually means.
Exactly. So for Advaita Vedanta, it's all about Brahman, right?
Right.
This ultimate unchanging reality.
Yes, this infinite ocean of pure consciousness, the ground of all being.
Okay, but for Buddhism, there's no such fixed point.
No fixed point, right.
Right. It's more about recognizing the impermanence and interconnectedness of everything.
Exactly. And this fundamental difference in how they see the nature of reality leads to very different understandings of liberation.
Okay.
For Vedanta, liberation is about realizing the self's identity with Brahman,
Right.
merging with that undifferentiated unity.
Right.
Like a drop of water dissolving into the ocean.
Okay, so it's kind of like a homecoming.
Yeah.
Emerging back into that ultimate source.
You could say that.
But for Buddhism, liberation isn't about merging with something.
Right.
It's more about letting go.
Letting go, exactly.
Right.
For Buddhism, liberation is about extinguishing all forms of clinging, including clinging to any notion of self.
Okay.
Even a true one.
So even the idea of a true self that merges with Brahman is still a form of clinging.
Yeah, you got it.
That needs to be let go of.
Needs to be let go of.
To achieve true liberation.
Exactly.
Okay, and this difference in their views on the self was a major point of contention.
Huge.
In these debates.
Egg time.
Between Advaita Vedanta and Buddhist scholars.
Right. Buddhist scholars accuse Shankaracharya of misinterpreting the concept of emptiness.
Okay.
Or sunyata.
Right.
Which is central to Buddhist philosophy.
Right.
They argued that he was trying to force it into his own Advaita Vedanta framework instead of understanding it on its own terms.
So for Buddhists, emptiness isn't about
Right.
everything being empty of independent existence.
Yeah.
Because it's all ultimately Brahman.
Right.
It's about recognizing this inherent impermanence. And interdependence of all phenomena.
Yes.
Including the self.
Exactly. They saw Shankaracharya's interpretation of emptiness as kind of a disguised essentialism, as if he was still clinging to the idea of a permanent, unchanging ground of being.
Yeah.
Even if he called it Brahman.
So it's like they're saying, hey, you're still holding on to something.
Yeah.
Even if you're calling it Brahman.
Right.
These debates sound pretty intense.
They were very heated.
Okay.
And, it highlights, I think, the subtle nuances and the potential for miscommunication that can arise even between traditions that seem to share some common ground.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we can't just assume that because two traditions use the same words, they mean the same thing.
Right.
It's crucial to understand the underlying philosophical assumptions that are at play.
Right. Okay. So we've got this fundamental disagreement about the nature of reality and the self.
Right.
What about the path to liberation?
Okay.
Did Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism have different ideas about how to achieve that ultimate freedom?
They did. Advaita Vedanta emphasizes the path of knowledge.
Okay.
Or jnana yoga.
Right.
It's about using your intellect through techniques like self-inquiry and contemplation.
Right.
To realize the truth of your non-dual nature, your identity with Brahman.
Okay, so it's almost like you're using your mind to transcend your mind.
Exactly.
Okay.
But Buddhism, while acknowledging the importance of wisdom and understanding doesn't see knowledge alone as sufficient for liberation.
Right.
They emphasize the importance of ethical conduct, meditation, and mental discipline, which they see as essential for uprooting those deep-seated habits of clinging and delusion that keep us trapped in the cycle of suffering.
So it's not just about knowing the truth.
Right.
It's about transforming your entire being. Your thoughts, your actions, your whole way of relating to the world.
You know, Buddhist practice is very much about cultivating a way of being in the world that's grounded in compassion, mindfulness, and an understanding of impermanence and interdependence.
So while both traditions see liberation as the ultimate goal, they offer different maps for getting there.
Yes.
Emphasizing different practices and approaches.
Exactly. And these differences in practice stem from their contrasting views on the nature of reality.
Right.
The self.
It's all interconnected.
It is. It's a beautiful tapestry of ideas.
It's incredible how these philosophical debates, which took place centuries ago, are still so relevant today.
They are, aren't they?
You know, they raise these fundamental questions about who we are, what this world is, how we could live a life of meaning and purpose.
And that's, I think, what makes studying philosophy so captivating. It's not just about abstract ideas.
It's about exploring the very essence of our existence, the questions that have puzzled humans for millennia.
And what I find so fascinating is how all these critiques of Shankaracharya's ideas, whether they come from other Hindu schools, Buddhist scholars, or even mystical traditions like Sufism, they can actually deepen our understanding of Advaita Vedanta itself.
Absolutely.
They force us to examine those ideas more closely to see the nuances and the potential pitfalls.
That's such an important point. Critiques aren't just about tearing something down. They can be incredibly constructive. They can help us refine our understanding, to see things from different angles, and ultimately to arrive at a more comprehensive and nuanced perspective.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the critiques of Shankaracharya, I'm left with just a sense of awe at the depth and complexity
of all these philosophical traditions.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And just a renewed appreciation, I think, for the importance of engaging with these big questions.
Absolutely. And I hope our listener is leaving with a similar sense of wonder and a thirst for further exploration. You know, remember, the journey of philosophical inquiry is never truly finished. There's always more to discover, more to question, more to ponder as we continue to grapple with these fundamental mysteries of existence.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
And on that note, dear listeners, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of Shankaracharya and his critics. We hope you've enjoyed this journey through the rich landscape of Indian philosophy, and that it sparks some new insights and questions for you to explore further.
Keep those philosophical wheels turning.
Yes. Until next time.